So hello everyone, welcome to the Darkest Hour podcast series, the third episode, and today we've got Peter George, the independent candidate for Franklin, joining us.
Thank you for having me, Heath. It's good to be here. Thanks.
Cool. So before we get into all the complex topics, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I suppose so. I've been a reporter all my working life since leaving school. I started off as a Sydney Morning Herald reporter in print, but over the years I've worked in federal parliament as a federal parliamentary reporter. I started working with the ABC here in Hobart. And then moved overseas, where I spent about 15 years as a foreign correspondent. Came back, worked for the foreign correspondent program when it first started up, and then moved on to Four Corners. So all my life a reporter, all my life telling stories about people who've had their own struggles, their own difficulties, people who fought against the odds, whether it be Indigenous Australians or whether it be people in Somalia or the UK for that matter.
So you're obviously not going into this without experience.
No.
As a former ABC journalist, as foreign correspondent and with Four Corners and doing politics in Canberra,
Yep.
It's safe to say you have a pretty concrete understanding of the political landscape. From your perspective, what do you see happening in Australia right now? And why are you standing as a candidate for Franklin?
How do I see us? I see politics in this way. It's a bit like that so-called Einstein theory, that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a better or a different result is the definition of insanity. We have spent decades putting in Labor or Liberal coalition, Labor, Liberal coalition, and look what a mess we're in. We've got political parties that are simply controlled and ruled by the big end of town, by big donors. They no longer represent what they're supposed to represent, which is the people on the ground. My view, and the reason I'm standing as an independent, is that, like the founders of the Constitution expected, individuals who come from their community with their community's concerns at heart, take those concerns and those interests to Canberra and fight for those interests. And then you coalesce around national and international issues. That's not happening anymore. The big parties don't speak to us anymore. And the evidence of that is the tidal wave of independent candidates and independents being elected around the country. I think at this election, this is the time to seize the day. Build a big crossbench, powerful crossbench that holds both parties to account and is transparent and brings back a bit of integrity to politics.
As you know, there's going to be a lot of choice in your electorate with the major parties, and you've also got Brendan Blomley from Clarence, the established Julie Collins, and of course yourself. There are a lot of high-profile individuals and a lot of choice for voters, so I guess what listeners are most eager to know right now is where do you stand in regards to your policies and what sets you apart from the other candidates?
What sets me apart from the parties is that I'm not a member of the party. No one is going to rule me or tell me how I'm to vote or how I'm to act. Julie Collins has been here for 17 years. She has, in many cases, been what I see as being absent without leave. Over the years that I've been taking on the fish farms for my community has invited Julie Collins to come and talk to us every year. And in 10 years, never once has she had the courtesy to come and meet us. Now, we're obviously going to have some differences of opinions with Julie Collins because her party line is pro-fish farming, expand fish farming, never mind about our waterways. But she should give us the respect and the credit to come and talk to us because we would give her the credit of a respectful hearing. Differences of opinions. That's the trouble with these big parties. They're not prepared to hear any other version of events except their version, which they impose on the community, rather than the community imposing it on them. Now, I've met up with Brendan Blomley. He's standing as an independent. He was a Liberal Party member for many years. He doesn't think the party's serve us anymore. Well, good on him. Let's turn Franklin independent. Let's make it work. I wish him well. We won't be standing against him. We'll be standing on my particular issues and proselytizing along those issues. Brendan will have very different opinions to mine. Well, let the Franklin electorate make a decision and choose from that.
Why do you think the minor parties and independents haven't seen the same or similar level of electoral success compared to the major parties? And what do you think are the main barriers and how are people tackling them?
Well, the main barriers to being an independent is getting your message across. You've got traditional media that simply covers, Albanese says this, Dutton says that, Albanese says this. It's always been seen by the media as a traditional two-party state. And that is, as I've said, it's been going on for decades and decades, and look where we are now. So breaking the stranglehold, breaking that duopoly is the first step towards bringing a parliament back to one that serves the people. And it's been quite clear in the last election, the last couple of elections, there has been this wave. Some people call them Teal, some people call them independents, but there has been a wave that has slowly overcome the big party stranglehold. But of course, the big parties have a lot of benefits. One is they have incumbency. Two is they have a whole heap of money that independents don't have. Three, they've set up a system which favors them all the time. And four, they've got this, that they're able to get their message, with their staff, with their money, they're able to push their message out to the exclusion of all else. And why can they do it? Because they've got this huge donor backbone for them, hidden away from public view, that is funding their campaign. Yeah. So nowadays, the big parties are essentially buying elections, buying votes by their sheer financial weight.
Well, going on to that, as the last few years, we've seen the major parties attain historically low primaries. And,
yes.
But over the recent time period, we've seen the passing of laws which some groups like the Greens and David Pocock claim are anti-independent. Do you believe the passing of the Electoral Reform Bill was a power grab by the major parties?
Oh, of course. Yeah. If you look at it, it gives them incredibly large funding, which no independent can face at all. Secondly, they're setting the level of disclosure at just above the level at which it costs to have dinner with the Prime Minister or dinner with the opposition leader. Let's be clear that the only area where Labor and Liberal come together and are prepared to operate together is to hold on to that duopoly of power. There's nothing they hate. Well, they may hate it if Liberals may hate it if Labor gets in and vice versa, but there's nothing they hate more than being held to account by a powerful crossbench. Now, I think it was Peter Gutwin who said at a recent dinner, a powerful crossbench is as powerful as the Prime Minister, or as powerful as an opposition leader, or as powerful as the leader of state, a premier. Now, that is a power which conveys enormous responsibility on any independent. But those independents can be seen to operate openly and transparently. And if they fail on that test, they will fail in Parliament. Their livelihood, their future, what they believe in relies entirely on integrity and transparency, which are the two things you do not get from Labor and Liberal.
Do you think the economic issues are going to decide this election rather than social-orientated ones? And whether you agree with that or not, how are you going to balance the concerns of potential voters?
The hip pocket nerve is always very important in any election, obviously. Yeah. We have 75% of the people of Franklin are having trouble paying their weekly bills and putting food on the table and keeping a roof over their head. More than 80% of renters are concerned, are struggling to pay their rent. More than 80% of people with mortgages are struggling to pay their mortgage. Now, don't tell me that that is not the fault of Labour or Liberal. They've been running this economy for the last 50, 60, 70 years, and look where they've got us. What we've got from Labour and Liberal is a housing crisis, a cost of living crisis, and then on top of that, you've got an environmental mess. Now, that's something I'm particularly interested in. There are no quick fixes for parties that have driven us down the road of a housing crisis, but there are fixes, and they can be addressed. And I have ideas about how those will be addressed. And if I were elected to Parliament, I'd be negotiating with both sides of both of the big parties and the independents to take some real action that is actually going to untangle the housing mess. However, we live on a wonderful planet, and as I've seen with the fish farms, the big end of town doesn't care what's happening in our waterways. We have this massive carnage happening now, millions of fish dying. We've got fat bombs turning up on our shores. We've got bits of deteriorating salmon washing up on our shores. We have a real crisis, and that's because Storm Bay's ecological system is totally unbalanced because of all that sewage that the fish farms are pumping out. So if we're going to use our waterways, swim in them, fish in them, love them, dive in them, sail on them, go out in your tinnies and so on, we don't want to be going out on waterways which are being destroyed, nor do we want to be able to, nor do we want to see our way of life and our love of natural, of the outdoors being destroyed either. We have to take action. And here in Franklin, we are more vulnerable than anywhere else in Australia to the sort of catastrophic fire that took out so much of Los Angeles. And that means we actually do have to take climate change seriously. We do have to take climate action. We do have to look after our waterways. We do have to look after our land-bound nature as well. It's all very well to say, well, that's someone else's job around the world. It's got to start somewhere. It can start here. We could be a clean, green, sustainable state.
So moving on, with the cost of living and housing affordability being the forefront of many people's minds right now.
Absolutely.
How do you plan on addressing this specifically? And do you think some of your agenda regarding climate change needs to take a backseat this election, or some sort of compromise?
I don't see why anything. I mean, we can think of 2 or 3 things at the same time. We can walk and chew gum. No, I don't think we have time to take a backward step on climate change and on climate action. That said, look, there are so many things that can be done quite quickly about housing. We can actually stop, we can restrict the number of housing rentals that are going to Airbnb and the other tourist accommodation. We can reduce those numbers and turn them into long-term accommodation. So there are a number of things that we can do on the short term, but the truth is we've got to be honest about it. To overcome the housing crisis, we need a 10-year plan. And to do that, we need a national policy on housing. And therefore the Commonwealth, like when I was younger, back in my day, the Commonwealth was building houses along with the states. We need a housing policy which is uniform across the states and is backed by both the states and by the Commonwealth. That's one of the things we can do about it. It'll take time. On the other hand, Ken Henry, former Secretary of the Treasury, one of the brightest men that Australia has produced in modern times, has come up with a perfectly good circular economy way of building houses quicker. And it begins with proper plantations of forestry, then value-adding those forestry products by using the modern methods of building materials, and building houses faster and quicker using timber. Good, strong housing. But that's going to take time. And that's the problem, is that we spent so many decades allowing the problem to exist and done nothing about it that we've got to be patient. And that's going to be a hard thing to do. When it comes to cost of living, well, let's get the freight equalization scheme working more adequately. It hasn't been changed for 25 years. Let's get let's force the supermarkets to justify price increases. Let's get Aldi in here. Let's get Lidl in here. Let's get more competition going. There are things that we can do immediately, but then again, systemically, there has been this long-term problem which the big parties have allowed to develop. I hope that answers.
It's most of it. I'm going back onto your point about getting sustainable timbers and stuff.
Yes.
In Tasmania, it's been a bit of a contentious issue
Yes.
with the Liberal Party here accusing the Greens and some of the independents advocating for, I guess, they'd say anti-logging and anti-acquiring resources.
And anti-jobs.
And anti-jobs. And they accuse the left of outsourcing materials such as timber to other foreign nations. Do you have any assurances or any idea of how to source timber sustainably in Tasmania?
I think sustainable timber Tasmania is it's really a very poor reflection of actually what they do. It's a bit dishonest.
Yeah, okay.
First of all, jobs. You know, there's some sort of madness that people who want to fight the fish farms and stop them from destroying our waterways and stop sort of clear fell logging somehow hate jobs, as though we're all mad. Of course we aren't. The most sustainable jobs are the jobs that are in sustainable industries. The fish farms will eventually implode. The multinationals will walk away, turn their backs, and they're not going to give a damn about the community at Strawn or the community in Franklin at all. The fish farms, the multinationals, all the multinationals don't care about what's happening in Tasmania. All they're looking for is profits. And they will take profits at whatever cost, and they will lie about it. The fish farm industry claims there are 5,000 jobs. There aren't 5,000 jobs. It's an absolute nonsense. It's actually a lie. Same thing in the timber industry. These are sort of arguments that people put up because they just want to continue to plunder our valuable resources. My argument is simply that if we're going to exploit our resources, and let's be clear that every human activity has an environmental impact. Of course it does. It's a question of getting that balance right. If we're going to do it, let's do the value adding here in Tasmania. Don't turn it into wood chips and export it. I mean, these are our timbers. All the profit's been made overseas, and then it's getting shipped back into Australia. It's a nonsense. It doesn't have to be that way if the policy settings are right. These are things again that won't be turned around overnight, but these are things that I will be pressing for if I was elected to Parliament.
Well, you're mentioning the profit taking of big corporations, and I understand that you take more of I guess, an anti-big company, big corporate approach. How would you go around?
Nothing wrong with multinationals.
No,
nothing wrong with big companies.
Like monopolistic behaviour and abuse of market power.
Look, what I'm saying about, for instance, the multinationals, JBS is the most corrupt multinational company on earth. It was fined $5 billion for trying to corrupt and bribe 1,800 politicians. That is industrial corruption. Cook Aquaculture, which owns Tassal, has been thrown out of Washington state and is responsible for the fact that all open net fish farming has been shut down across the whole western seaboard of the United States because they wrecked Puget Sound, a waterway as important to the United States as Macquarie Harbour or Sydney Harbour is. Same thing with mining companies. You know, what is happening? There's the British Centre for the Study of Corruption speaks of elite cartels as a form of legal corruption, and it has identified Tasmania. It's done a report on Tasmania, which says that the elite The people who have run this state for so long, that minority, does deals within itself and with the big end of town and with all those people who are part of the entitled circle, and to the cost of ordinary Tasmanians. And that's why people are against the Mac Point Stadium. It's because these little backroom deals, these corrupt backroom deals, are done with large corporations, with lobby groups, to the exclusion of Tasmanians who are losing out financially from it. So I'm not against multinationals. Let them come in and invest. Let them come in and invest with our rules, our regulations, and pay their goddamn taxes. Because the fish industry, the salmon industry, has not paid its taxes, has paid no taxes here for 3 years. Now, if these salmon companies are operating in Australia as they are in Norway, they'd be paying 28% tax. So let's say they're making $1 billion. $200 million would be paid in tax to us for use of our waterways. $200 million over 2 years, they'll buy you probably a new hospital, certainly buy you a lot of new schools, but we let them get away with it.
The big corporations would argue that putting taxes on them would increase their operational costs and that they'd have to pass that on to consumers. We've seen that in 2014 with Gina Rinehart's companies campaigning against Kevin Rudd's super mining tax. So what do you say? How do you say they won't do that again?
Well, of course they do. I mean, they will find every excuse they can possibly put up not to pay taxes. That's why they have, tax specialists. That's why they have lawyers and so on. I'm sorry, if you want to come and use our waterways, if you want to come and use our forests, if you want to use our mining, our minerals, if you want to come and operate in our state, pay your goddamn way. And let's face it, yes, it would cut into their profits. Well, hell, don't be so goddamn greedy. Pay your way. This is our state. It's not their state. They don't pay tax. They take their profits overseas. It's a rip-off. And this government, locally, federally, are allowing them to do it. Well, I'm sorry, it's got to stop. There's no free dinners, and there's no free ride on our taxation system either, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
This makes me crazy. These companies are here because they can make a profit, and they make big profits. So, give us the fair share that you owe us. Don't work your way around it. And that's what Microsoft does. That's what Google does. That's what the fish farms do. Sorry, free ride is over.
So going back to housing,
yes.
There are quite a few tools or ways to fix the crisis. So we've got reforms to negative gearing, building more homes,
yes.
reducing immigration, banning foreign investors. What way would you like to fix the housing crisis?
All those things are worthwhile working on.
Yeah.
As I've said, we shouldn't be in this situation. Labor and Liberal have put us here. It's taken so many decades. It's going to take time to resolve it. There are so many different ways of operating. I actually find it a little disturbing that we're talking about expanding the footprint of Hobart, going out further and further.
Yeah, okay.
I think there are some difficulties in that, which include isolation, suburban isolation, include getting to work, including infrastructure and so on. I have spent some time in Scandinavian countries, particularly where inner city areas, but also suburban areas, have been regenerated, in which, for real community, to build proper community, which means that you have people who are wealthy, you have people who are poorer, you have people who have been unhomed, and you build a community. You build the schools, you build the recreation, you build the commercial activity around housing for different for different social requirements. That's where I think should be happening at Mac Point. I think you could build 1,000 good homes for people of all types, and you could build a community right here in Hobart. And that would be, and the same thing could be happening over on the eastern shore as well. I went to a renters meeting the other day, and these people are saying, we're looked down on because we're renters. And it's because the dream of the quarter-acre block is no longer an attainable dream. And so that people look at us and sometimes we feel like failures. Well, as I said to them, you're not the failures, the system has failed you. One of the UN Declaration of Human Rights is the right to accommodation that gives you a dignified way of life. So there are things we could do, but there are very few quick fixes. And the quick fixes are, for instance, changes to negative gearing, which is that changes to negative gearing is difficult because there are a number of people who have built their futures around negative gearing. So you may have to do some grandfathering. But I think these are things for Senate committees to investigate and then for government to act on. And this is the problem. We get lots and lots of investigations and no government actions. Crossbenchers can force action.
Yeah. Energy's been another big issue, and with this election being dubbed the energy referendum or election.
Is it?
That's what a lot of the mainstream media has been talking about in regards to Dutton's.
I've missed that.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, no, of course
nuclear
it is.
energy
Of course,
and renewable
nuclear energy. Yeah, that's true. Okay, the energy election.
Yeah.
Well, it is whatever you want to call it, yeah.
So advocating for greater environmental protection,
Yes.
how do you plan on addressing these concerns for both consumers and producers regarding Australia's energy?
Okay. First of all, you don't build the Marinus Link. Okay, this is my view. Tasmania could not only be 100% renewable energy, clean energy, Tasmania could be 400% clean energy. So my view is this, is that before you think about exporting that energy, start thinking about, and this is circular, start thinking about producing children or young people coming out of education who are better trained, better ready for the 21st century, which is going to be highly digital. Make sure that they're healthy, so that what you've got in Tasmania is a workforce able to live up to the requirements of investors who will come to Tasmania because we are able to offer them well-priced energy, sustainable energy, renewable energy, which is what the world is looking for. And there are so many companies now, so many industries now, which rely on intensive energy use. For instance, the cloud takes up huge amounts of energy. For instance, green steel will take up use. We can actually build an economy and build a society of people who are ready to work for sophisticated 21st century industry, attracted to this state because of its reputation, because of the carbon credit, and because they're able to proudly boast they work in a clean, green energy state. Again, that's going to take time, but, honestly, nuclear energy is just a wedge issue. It's just a wedge issue.
Would you be against nuclear? Or
Yeah.
Do you think?
Tell me, the day
what
that
would be your argument against?
The day you can tell me that we can produce nuclear energy that does not produce nuclear, highly irradiated waste that we don't know what to do with, is the day that I might well say, sure, if nuclear energy stacks up economically, then I'd be prepared to consider it. But the truth of the matter is, at this stage of the game, nuclear energy produces nuclear waste and we don't know what to do with it. So answer me that question first and then come back. Yep. It's also too damned expensive at the moment. Anyway.
I understand your opposition to large salmon and what you've argued is environmentally damaging aquaculture in Tasmania. Do you see any significant economic and legislative hurdles in reforming the salmon industry? And if so, are there any ways which you could work around this?
First of all, I'm not anti-salmon farming. What I'm against is the practices of salmon farming and the impact of salmon farming. In the mid-80s, when this was a boutique industry, that balance between human activity and environmental impact was acceptable to Tasmanians. So the answer is, if the salmon industry cannot operate in our waters without damaging our marine life, without damaging our waterways, without changing the ecosystems, they shouldn't be operating at all. End of story. Like 72% of Tasmanians, I believe that the fish farms should be out of our local protected vulnerable waterways. There's at least $3 or $4 billion being invested around the world at the moment on land-based fish farming. If the science and the regulator are prepared to hold the companies to account, then let's start saying to them, let's start encouraging them to move ashore. Like, I don't believe you can't stop this fish farming industry overnight. I would argue for a 5 to 7 year transition, no expansion, a slow reduction of fish farms in the water. I would turn all the hatcheries that are operating and polluting our waterways, our rivers at the moment, all of them will become recycled. And it is possible. We are on the verge of a real reform internationally of the salmon industry. There are always going to be problems with the salmon industry. It still takes 1.5 kilos of wild fish to produce, from a poor country, to produce 1 kilo of salmon to go onto the table of a rich person. We've got to resolve those issues too.
Seeing though Julie Collins is the Minister for Fisheries and Agriculture.
I know, what a great irony.
What do you think the Albanese government and Minister Collins have contributed to your community over the past 3 years, and also
What have they contributed? Nothing but anger. My community is furious, and I can tell you that wherever I go, we had a meeting here last night. Wherever I go and talk to people, oddly enough, they want to talk about hip pocket issues. But the people of Franklin have some of the most beautiful waterways in the world. And, we've got Bruny Island, we've got Storm Bay, we've got the Dontracasто Channel, the Huon. It's extraordinary how many people are furious with that. I've spoken to fishermen who say Julie Collins is the least engaged and probably the worst fisheries minister they've ever had, and they're the people who've talked to her. So I find it very hard to think of what Labor and Albanese have done for Franklin, because for 17 years, it's not been an electorate that's been in play. For 17 years, the Liberals have been absent. There haven't been, there have been some independents standing and some small parties standing. But look at what happens. It's no coincidence that the roads are so much better in the north of the state, because the Liberal Party and the Labor Party are always fighting over the marginal Bass and Braddon. Down here, we've got potholes your car could virtually disappear into. Why is that? Because they take us for granted. And then all of a sudden the election comes along, and that huge roundabout over near Bunnings on the eastern shore, all of a sudden Julie Collins says, we're going to spend $100 million to sort out the roundabout because it's dangerous. Surprise, surprise. A month or two before the elections, all of a sudden they're going to start spending money here. Why are they going to spend money here? Because they're afraid of independence. That's why it's happening. No other reason.
In regards to the climate crisis and implications for this on Australia, how must Tasmania and the nation transform in order to reach its targets agreed upon by the Paris Climate Accords?
it's so easy. You know,
The
Tasmania.
coalition Labor would say that it's not so easy.
Well, no, but it's not that easy internationally,
Yeah.
but it has to start somewhere. And the thing is that Tasmania is in the perfect position for doing it. We have got renewables. We do have the ability to build renewables. This state is the right size. It's only 525,000 people. So yeah, I can see Tasmania as a paragon for climate action. And that doesn't mean destroying jobs, that means building jobs. That doesn't mean running out of money for education, it means building education. We can do all those things. You know, the systemic problems that Tasmania has got is we're selling off all our natural resources for a pittance. Our education is so bad that 50% of Tasmanians are considered to be functionally illiterate, which means that they have a struggle filling in forms. You know, back in the 60s, people used to come from other states to look at the education system here because it was considered to be so advanced. And look at the health system with collapsing hospitals and so on. You know, these are things we should be concentrating on. But it does require, whether you like it or not, it does require tax reform. It does, going back to the 2009 Ken Henry review of taxation, none of the big parties are too frightened to touch tax because they'll just always attack each other. They'll always point fingers at each other. A crossbench can work across the parties and they can start to drive change. It won't be easy because a crossbench isn't one party, obviously, you know, but independence can drive change. Yeah. It's been shown to work. I mean, been shown to work ever since World War II in Europe. Nobody thinks twice about minority government in Europe. That's how it works. And Europe has been essentially, you know, peaceful up until the Ukraine, but that's got to do with Russia, Ukraine. But, you know, in Europe, everybody works with minority governments. That's what democracy is.
Yeah. The major parties would argue that they're planning on taking action on many of the issues that you've mentioned. And they've also stated that they're more effective at targeting issues. Yeah. What makes independence any better for the compared to the big parties?
Okay, look at the history. The big parties are going to make changes. I mean, sorry, what are we talking about? I mean, you've had 50, 60, 70, 80 years to make the changes. And look what a load of crap you've left us to deal with, right? So give me a break. Secondly, you know, big parties make promises all the time. But they're election promises. Does anyone believe those hollow election promises anymore? The great thing about independence is that independents will hold them to account. They'll hold them to those promises. That's what independents will do. So my argument is, be Australian, be Tasmanian, think independent, act independent, and vote independent. Just be independent. The big parties have had all the time in the world to show us how clever they are. And look where they've left us. Housing crisis, cost of living crisis,
the big parties,
environmental mess.
Yeah, but the big parties would argue that having a minority government would be unworkable,
that
there's going to be a coalition of chaos, etc.
But it's nonsense. I mean, it works all around the world. And what's more, it has actually worked very well on the occasions that it's happened. I mean, under Julia Gillard's government, until, of course, and even in Tasmania, until, of course, the big parties decide that they want to, they want to wrest power back. And basically, they'll cut the ground under the independents. The more independents there are in Parliament, the more transparent they'll be, the more integrity there'll be, the more accountability there'll be, and the better democracy will work. That's what democracy is all about. So, of course, the big parties will, accuse the independents of undermining government, but it's bullshit.
What do you think are some of the trade-offs that need to be made for society in the foreseeable future? If there are any.
The trade-offs of essentially, we need to, there are a few things. One is our electoral cycle is too short at a federal level. 3 years is simply not enough time for for a government to institute policies and to lock them in. I mean, let's face it, with the government at the moment, you've got 1 year to get your policies sort of set, and then you've got 2 years to fight the next election. So that's one of the trade-offs. I certainly wouldn't want to give the big parties any more time and power than they've had, but the truth of the matter is the system doesn't work well. I think we should have a change to 5-year elections. The other thing is that the trade-off has got to be, we do need tax changes, and tax changes will cost some people, but will benefit other. We need tax changes that will make us a more even, a fairer society, and will pay for the infrastructure that we need. And when I talk about infrastructure, I'm talking about hospitals and education, as well as roads and rail and all the rest of it. These are things that are going to cost us. But if we don't do it, our society is gradually going to wither, and we can't afford to let that happen. We are actually inherently a wealthy nation, but we shouldn't have so many poor people. We shouldn't have so many people who are falling through the safety net. And most importantly, I mean, why do I do this? I mean, who would put themselves through a campaign and having to go and argue these things in Parliament? In my view, and why would I do it at my age? Because I care about my children and my grandchildren and their children. Someone in my position, I think, has the experience, dare I say it, the wisdom, and I have been, I have gone and worked in more than 100 countries around the world. I've seen how societies can struggle and how they can build themselves and how they fail themselves. I want to leave my nation and my electorate and my Tasmania in a better position for my children and my children's children than I've managed to achieve and politics have managed to achieve now. And that's actually what seriously drives me.
Cool. Going back to your statement on taxation reform, the Libertarians and the Coalition would argue that drastic reforms or an increase in taxation would negatively affect big corporations, make them less innovative, and just hurt the little man. So do you think that with your taxation reforms that you could also make government more efficient or effective in regards to the redistribution of income?
I wish I could answer that clearly. I suspect you know more about the economic workings of a nation than I do. So my answer is going to be, is that I need to look in much more into this. I need to speak to, I need the think tanks, and I don't care whether they're conservative think tanks or progressive think tanks. I need the think tanks. I need great individuals like Ken Henry, and I need to talk to people like Saul Eslake, who's the Tasmanian economist. What I do know very clearly is that it ain't working well now. What I do know is that the corporations actually get away with murder, and they will always scream about, we don't need to pay more, we shouldn't be paying more tax, we need to invest and so on. But let's face it, where they can make profits, they always will. Profits have to reflect reality. At this stage of the game, what we've got is this incredible division of the very rich Australians and the very poor Australians. We've got CEOs earning sort of 50 or 100 or 150 times what an average wage worker is. I mean, all these things are systemic issues that we actually do need to resolve. How you go about it, there's no easy answer that I'm aware of, but I will pursue those answers.
As you know, Franklin is or was a pretty safe Labor seat, but this election we could see this change. Where do you sit in the middle of all this, and how do you think you'll be able to challenge the current member seat?
Right. Julie Collins, I think, has lost first votes all the way through her 17 years. She's now down at less than 37%. 37% is generally considered now getting towards marginal. Yeah. Liberals have got around about 26%. Their vote will be split between Brendan Blomley, who one assumes will attract Liberals who no longer rusted on to the Liberal Party itself. The Greens generally get around 17%, and then there's been leftovers. I believe that with the mood that people have, which is that they are turning off from the major parties, that the major parties will lose votes. I mean, nationally, they're going to be, they're going to be well down. They may not get more than 30% each, which gives independents a real fighting chance. I believe that the progressive side, once preferences are distributed, I actually think there's a very good chance. Well, there is a chance. It might be threading the eye of the needle, but there is a chance that by the time the preferences have been divided up, that there'll be a preference battle with Julie Collins. And I think that we have a real chance. We might be the I don't want to claim to be the underdog or the winner or anything. All I'm saying is that nationally, the national press see Julie Collins' seat as suddenly having, well, they've woken up to the fact that Julie Collins' seat is a marginal. And look, if we can turn Franklin marginal, it won't be ignored anymore. If we can turn Franklin independent, I believe we can do great things in Franklin, because the big parties will have to listen to us, and we can take the voice of Franklin to federal parliament rather than federal parliament imposing its voice, or the federal political parties imposing their voice on Franklin.
Now, let's say you manage to take the seat or are unable to get into Parliament. You're likely going to be in a situation where either the current Albanese government falls into minority or the Liberals scraping with the crossbench. In either of these scenarios, where do you see yourself as an independent negotiating policy?
This is the hardest question of all. The responsibility, it's hard to stand, but then you're going to take on a responsibility of representing the people of Franklin. That's a huge responsibility. Then the next responsibility is saying, okay, so who are you going to guarantee supply to, and who are you going to give confidence to? And that's going to be a really hard thing to do. And I would like to say that during that period of what will be negotiation, I'll talk to people in Franklin and try to get try to take the mood of Franklin and respond to that in federal parliament. That said, one side or another is going to have to be given a degree of confidence and supply. But once that's done, I think all bets are off. You negotiate with the things that are important to Franklin, that are important to the nation, and you hold the parties to their promises. And that's a really hard thing to do, because those big parties are nothing if not masters of being slippery. But the bigger the crossbench, the easier it's going to be to talk across party lines. I can talk to Labor, I can talk to Liberal, I can talk to crossbenchers. I know a lot of crossbenchers will be Liberal-oriented, others will be progressive-oriented. That's fine. We can talk amongst ourselves, but in the end, it's going to be a matter of conscience, and it's going to be a matter of my reporting back to the electorate. Why did I vote this way? What were my reasons? And then, a bit like Andrew Wilkie, every now and then saying, well, I made a mistake on that. I'm sorry about that, but we're all human.
Yep. On the chance that you're not elected, how do you plan on engaging with your community in the future and working towards getting a foothold in Parliament maybe in the next cycle?
Okay. Were I not to be elected, I'm 73. a reasonably healthy 73 with a lot of experience, I would be prepared to go a second time around.
Okay.
However, elected or not, I think one of my jobs would be to mentor someone younger, possibly female because of the gender balance in Parliament, who can take my experience and build up their experience and work alongside me, so that should in 3 years' time this person be someone who's ready to go, I don't see my, at 73, I'm not likely to be a career politician for long. I would be, if I can mentor someone ready to step in and do the same sort of job, which is represent the people of Franklin in federal parliament, then that's what I would like to do. So I will go on being involved actively with my community. I'll continue to try hold power to account and the multinationals to account. And I will hopefully pass on whatever wisdom or experience I've got to the next generation. And as I said to you earlier, this is why I'm doing it. I'm at an age now where I can give back. I've sucked up amazingly good stuff in this life, and unfortunately I have been part of the problem for the footprint, whether willingly or unwillingly, ignorantly or whatever. I've had a good life on this planet. I've been lucky. Australia gave me a good education. Public broadcasting, which I think is the jewel in the crown of a democracy, gave me a way of telling the stories of people around the world and telling the stories of people in Australia. So now's my chance to give something back.
Well, that's the end of the podcast. Thanks for being on.
Thank you,
I don't know if you have any platforms or anything you want to promote to some of our viewers.
Look, there are a number of places you can find what this campaign is all about. Remembering that I'm the candidate, but there's an incredible team behind us. I mean, we've got more than 200 volunteers. We've had generous donations. We always use more, but we had generous donations. I've got this fantastic team, some of whom have run campaigns before. Some are in advertising. It's a broad spectrum of our society, of ages and abilities and so on. So we do have petergeorgeforfranklin.com as a website, and that is gradually being populated all the time. You can find us on social media. We're both on Blue Sky and on Twitter, and we're on Instagram, and we're on Facebook, and you can even find us on TikTok. TikTok is probably not my strongest suit, but on the other hand, there's an important audience in TikTok, and there are ways of getting your message across, serious messages across, in a light-hearted way. And it's what I've always said is that don't take yourself too seriously. Take what you do seriously. So I'm quite happy to be light-hearted about what I do and my approach to things, but underneath it all, there is serious care there.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Lovely to meet you, Heath.
Yes, nice to meet you too. Cool. That's a wrap.
Did I do that all right? Yeah. My wife says I can talk under wet concrete.